The sound of gunshots echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek as Beatrice Grayson pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of the Rusty Nail Saloon, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might burst through her chest. Her once fine dress was torn at the hem, dust coating the fabric that had been vibrant blue just days ago, before her life had shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The year was 1875, and Beatrice B., to the few who had earned the right to such familiarity, had never imagined she would find herself in such a predicament. 22 years of careful upbringing in Boston hadn't prepared her for the harsh realities of the frontier. She clutched the small leather satchel containing all she had left in the world, a photograph of her parents, $73, and her mother's silver locket. "I know you're back there, B." The slurred voice of Jasper Quinn, the man who had pursued her across 3 territories, carried on the hot afternoon air. "Your daddy's debts ain't gonna disappear just 'cause you ran." B held her breath, pressing harder against the wall as if she could somehow melt into it. Her father had died 3 months ago, leaving behind gambling debts she hadn't known about until Quinn had shown up at their Boston home, claiming ownership of everything including her, if she couldn't pay. The footsteps grew closer, boot heels crunching on the hard, packed dirt. B glanced desperately toward the open prairie beyond the back of the saloon. If she ran now, she'd be visible for miles across the flat landscape, an easy target for Quinn's notorious marksmanship. The sound of another set of footsteps made her freeze. These were different, steady, purposeful, not the stumbling gait of a drunk man seeking vengeance. "You looking for something, mister?" The new voice was deep, controlled, with just enough edge to make B's skin prickle. She dared to peek around the corner of the building. A tall man stood facing Quinn, his stance casual yet somehow commanding. His broad shoulders were outlined against the setting sun, the brim of his hat pulled low over his face. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster worn with use but well maintained. "Ain't your business, cowboy," Quinn spat. "Just collecting what's rightfully mine." The stranger shifted slightly, revealing a silver sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. "Anything that involves drawing a gun in my town becomes my business real quick." Quinn hesitated, his hand hovering near his holster. "I'm looking for a woman. Brown hair, blue eyes, fancy Eastern clothes. Thief she is." "Haven't seen anyone like that," the sheriff replied evenly. "But I suggest you holster that weapon and cool off at the hotel." Silver Creek doesn't take kindly to men hunting women through the streets. Quinn's face contorted with rage. "You don't understand. She owes me." "I understand you're about 3 seconds from spending the night in my jail," the sheriff interrupted. "Your choice how this goes." For a tense moment, B thought Quinn might draw. Instead, he spat in the dirt and backed away. "This ain't over, I'll find her." "Not in my town, you won't. Not like this." The sheriff stood immovable until Quinn retreated toward the hotel, muttering curses with each step. Only when Quinn disappeared did the sheriff turn toward the back of the saloon. "You can come out now, madam. He's gone for the time being." B remained frozen, uncertain whether to trust this stranger or flee while she had the chance. "I'm not going to hurt you," he continued, taking a cautious step forward. "But you can't stay behind that saloon all night, and I reckon you could use some help." Something in his voice, a gentle assurance beneath the authority, made B take a tentative step into view. In the fading light, she could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun, and a strong jaw darkened with stubble. His eyes, a deep green that reminded her of the Atlantic in summer, assessed her with concern rather than judgment. "I'm Sheriff Preston Fitzgerald," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. And you look like you've had a rough day. Beatrice Grayson, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. And it's been a rough month, Sheriff Fitzgerald. He nodded, replacing his hat. I figured as much. You're the first woman I've seen hiding behind Mabel's saloon who wasn't working there. He glanced toward where Quinn had disappeared. That man is trouble. What's your connection to him? Bea hesitated. Years of proper upbringing warning against sharing personal matters with strangers. But proper upbringing hadn't helped her escape Quinn, and she was desperately alone in unfamiliar territory. My father owed him money, she finally said. After father died, Quinn came to collect. When I couldn't pay the full amount, he suggested an alternative arrangement. The sheriff's expression darkened. I've seen his type before. They think a woman alone is easy prey. I left Boston the next day, Bea continued, but he followed. Everywhere I go, he finds me. Her voice broke. I don't know what to do anymore. Sheriff Fitzgerald was quiet for a moment, considering. First thing is to get you somewhere safe for the night. My sister Rose runs the boarding house at the edge of town. She'll have a room and can lend you some clothes that might help you blend in better. Bea glanced down at her travel-worn but distinctly Eastern attire. You think I stand out that much? The corner of his mouth lifted in a brief smile. In Silver Creek, you might as well be carrying a sign. Despite everything, Bea found herself returning his smile, the first genuine one in weeks. I suppose proper Boston fashion isn't quite suited for this environment. Not if you're trying to hide, he agreed. Come on, stay close to me, and if we see Quinn, let me do the talking. As they walked through the growing shadows, Bea kept glancing around nervously. Won't people notice me with you? Won't they talk? Small towns run on gossip, Preston acknowledged. But they also look after their own. By morning, everyone will know I've taken an interest in your situation, which means Quinn will have more than just me to contend with if he tries anything. I'm not one of your own, Bea pointed out. I'm just passing through. Preston gave her a sidelong glance. Everyone's just passing through until they find a reason to stay. The boarding house was a 2-story white clapboard building with green shutters and a wide porch. Lanterns glowed warmly in the windows, and the smell of cooking wafted out to greet them. Bea's stomach rumbled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since morning. Rose Fitzgerald proved to be as kind as her brother was protective. A widow in her mid-30s with auburn hair and the same green eyes as Preston. She welcomed Bea without questions, ushering her inside while Preston explained the situation in low tones on the porch. You poor thing, Rose said when Bea had been settled at the kitchen table with a bowl of stew and fresh bread. Traveling alone all this way with that awful man on your heels. I didn't have much choice, Bea replied, savoring the hearty food. Quinn made it clear what would happen if I stayed. Rose patted her hand. Well, you're safe now. Preston won't let anything happen to you. I can't impose on your brother's protection forever, Bea said. I need to move on, find somewhere Quinn won't think to look. Preston, who had joined them at the table, shook his head. Running hasn't worked so far. You need to stand your ground. Against a man with a gun and a grudge, Bea asked incredulously. I'm not exactly skilled in frontier defense, Sheriff. Preston, he corrected. And I'm not suggesting you face him alone. Silver Creek takes care of its problems, and right now, Quinn is a problem. What are you suggesting? Preston leaned forward, his eyes intense. Stay here. Let us help you. Quinn can't touch you without going through the whole town, and men like him don't have the stomach for those odds. I can't ask that of you, of any of you, Bea protested. You didn't ask, Rose interjected. We offered. Besides, the school's been looking for a teacher since Mrs. Winters left to care for her ailing mother back east. You look like you've had some education. Bea blinked in surprise. Yes, I attended Miss Porter's school in Connecticut. I can read and write, do arithmetic, know French and Latin more than qualified, Rose said with satisfaction. The town council would hire you tomorrow if Preston vouches for you. But I've never taught before, Bea objected. Preston's expression was gentle but determined. You can learn. The children need someone, and you need a reason to stop running. He hesitated, then added, I promise you, Beatrice Grayson, if you stay in Silver Creek, you'll never have to hide again. Something in his voice, a quiet certainty, a strength that asked nothing in return, made Bea's breath catch. It had been so long since anyone had offered her protection without expecting something in return. 1 week, she said finally. I'll stay 1 week, if Quinn hasn't given up by then. He will, Preston assured her. Men like Quinn are bullies. They only persist when they think they've got the advantage. Later, in the small but clean room Rose had prepared for her, Bea stood by the window, looking out at the unfamiliar landscape of her temporary refuge. Silver Creek was nothing like Boston, rawer, wilder, the buildings more utilitarian than beautiful. Yet there was something compelling about its straightforward honesty, the lack of pretense. Like its sheriff, she thought, remembering Preston's direct gaze. In Boston, men cloaked their intentions in flowery words and social niceties. Preston Fitzgerald simply said what he meant and stood by his word. A movement in the street below caught her eye. Preston was leaving, his tall figure unmistakable even in the darkness. He paused at the gate, looking back at the boarding house, and for a moment, Bea thought he might be looking at her window. Then he continued on his way, disappearing into the night. 1 week, she reminded herself. Just until Quinn gave up and moved on. Then she would continue her journey. To where, she wasn't quite sure. Somewhere she could start over, somewhere far from the ghosts of Boston and her father's mistakes. Yet as she prepared for bed, Bea couldn't help wondering if she might have already found that somewhere. Here in this dusty frontier town with its straightforward sheriff, who made promises to women hiding behind saloons. Morning brought a clarity that the exhaustion of the previous day had obscured. Bea woke to sunlight streaming through curtains that were decidedly not her own and the distant sound of a rooster crowing. For a moment, disorientation gripped her until the events of the previous day came flooding back. Silver Creek. Quinn. Sheriff Fitzgerald. She sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. Her belongings, the pitiful few she'd managed to bring with her, sat atop the dresser where she'd placed them the night before. Rose had promised to help her find suitable clothing, but for now, Bea would have to make do with her travel-wrinkled dress. A knock at the door startled her. Miss Grayson. It's Rose. I've brought some things you might be able to use. When Bea opened the door, Rose bustled in with an armful of fabrics. These should fit well enough until we can get something made specifically for you. The blue calico is a bit plain, but practical for everyday wear. Bea fingered the sturdy cotton, so different from the fine silks and wools she was accustomed to. It's perfect. Thank you, Mrs. Just Rose, please, the older woman interrupted with a warm smile. We don't stand on ceremony much here. Now get dressed and come down for breakfast. Preston will be by soon to take you to meet the town council about the teaching position. So quickly? Bea asked, alarmed at how rapidly events were moving. Rose's expression softened. The children have been without proper schooling for nearly a month. And, she added with a knowing look, my brother seems to think establishing you quickly in town is the best protection against your pursuer. After Rose left, Bea changed into the blue calico dress. It was indeed plain, with none of the bustles or elaborate trimmings of her Boston wardrobe, but the simplicity was refreshing. She managed to tame her hair into a simple bun and descended to the kitchen, where delicious smells awaited. 3 men sat at the long table, all stopping mid-conversation when she appeared. Preston rose immediately, and Bea was struck again by his commanding presence. In daylight, she could see his features more clearly. The strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his right eyebrow, the way his dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar. "Miss Grayson," he greeted her, his voice warm. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "Your sister has been extraordinarily kind." "Rose has a gift for making people feel at home," Preston agreed, then gestured to the other men. "These are 2 of our town councilmen. Henry Daniels owns the general store, and Thomas Warren runs the livery stable." Both men nodded respectfully, though Bea caught curious glances exchanged between them. News of her arrival had clearly spread. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Grayson," Henry said. "Preston tells us you might be interested in taking over the schoolhouse." Bea shot Preston a quick glance. "Yes, though I should be honest that I have no teaching experience." Thomas waved a dismissive hand. Neither did Mrs. Winters when she started. "What matters is you can read and write better than most of us, and you're willing to try." "The children need structure," Henry added. "They're running wild without school to keep them occupied." Bea took the seat Rose indicated, accepting a cup of coffee. "I'd like to see the schoolhouse before I commit." "Of course," Preston said. "We can go after breakfast." The meal passed with conversation focused mostly on town matters, for which Bea was grateful. No one asked about her past or her connection to Quinn, though she suspected Preston had already provided whatever explanation he deemed necessary. As they were finishing, Rose touched Bea's arm gently. "I've put together some supplies for your room at the schoolhouse: linens, dishes, that sort of thing. There's a small apartment attached to the back where the teacher traditionally lives." "I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," Rose interrupted. "You'll need your own space, and it makes sense for the teacher to be near the school." Preston stood, placing his hat on his head. "Ready to see your potential new workplace." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town. A simple one-room building with a bell tower and large windows to catch the light. Adjacent to it was indeed a small cottage, connected by a covered walkway. The entire structure needed paint and minor repairs, but it was solid and clean. Inside, rows of desks faced a larger desk at the front of the room. Bookshelves lined one wall, sparsely populated with worn volumes. A blackboard dominated the front wall, and a pot-bellied stove sat in the corner, cold now in the summer heat, but essential for the approaching winter months. "It's not much compared to schools back east, I imagine," Preston said as Bea walked slowly through the room, running her fingers along the desktops. "It's perfect," she murmured. There was something appealing about the simplicity, the honest purpose of the place. "How many students would I have?" 22, ranging from 6 to 16, Preston replied. "Most of the older ones only come when farm work allows, especially during planting and harvest." Bea nodded, trying to imagine herself standing before these desks, imparting knowledge to frontier children whose lives were so different from her own privileged upbringing. "The cottage is through here," Preston continued, leading her through a door at the back of the schoolroom. The teachers' quarters were modest but adequate. A small sitting room with a fireplace, a tiny kitchen, a bedroom just large enough for a bed and dresser, and a washroom. Everything was clean but bare, awaiting a personal touch. Mrs. Winters took most of her belongings when she left, Preston explained. "But the town will provide the necessities." Bea moved to the window, which looked out over a small garden, overgrown now but rich with potential. Beyond it stretched the open prairie, vast and golden under the summer sun. "It's so different from Boston," she said softly. "There, You can hardly see the horizon for all the buildings and smoke. Preston came to stand beside her. Too different, she turned to face him, struck by the genuine concern in his eyes. This man barely knew her, yet he'd offered protection, a home, a purpose, all without asking for anything in return. "No," she replied. "Just different, I think. I think I could be happy here, at least for a while." The relief in his expression was unmistakable. "The council will want to meet with you formally, but it's really just a formality. The position is yours if you want it." "And Quinn?" she asked, the name bitter on her tongue. Preston's jaw tightened. "Leave him to me. I sent a telegram to the sheriff in the last town you passed through. I'm building a case against him, harassment at the very least, possibly extortion. He'll say my father owed him money. He has papers. Gambling debts aren't legally enforceable in most territories," Preston interrupted. "And even if your father did owe him legitimately, that debt died with him unless you co-signed any agreements." Bea blinked in surprise. "I didn't. I knew nothing about it until after father died. Then you have no legal obligation to him whatsoever." Preston's expression softened. "You've been running from a threat that has no teeth, Bea." The use of her familiar name, spoken with such gentle assurance, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. For months she'd been terrified, exhausted, running from town to town with Quinn always a few days behind. The possibility that she might actually be free of him was overwhelming. Preston's hand moved as if to touch her arm, then fell back to his side. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have used your given name." "No, it's fine," she said, wiping away a stray tear. "It's just been a long time since anyone has called me that with kindness." His smile was warm, reaching his eyes in a way that made something flutter in her chest. "Well, you'll find no shortage of kindness in Silver Creek, Miss Grayson, especially if you take on teaching our children." She took a deep breath, looking around the small cottage that could become her home. 1 week, she had promised herself. "But perhaps." "I'll do it," she said. "I'll take the position at least until you find someone with proper teaching experience." Preston's smile broadened. "I have a feeling you're going to surprise yourself with how well you take to it." As they walked back toward town, Bea noticed people watching from storefronts and porches, curiosity evident in their expressions. Preston nodded greetings to each, occasionally introducing her as our new schoolteacher. Each time, Bea felt a strange mixture of anxiety and pride. She had never been our schoolteacher before. She had been John Grayson's daughter, a Boston society girl with prospects for a good marriage but little else to define her. Here, in this dusty frontier town, she was being given the chance to be someone entirely new, someone who contributed, who had value beyond her family connections or marriage potential. "Sheriff." A young boy of about 10 ran up to them, skidding to a stop in the dirt. "Ma says to tell you there's a stranger at the hotel asking questions about a woman. Says he's looking for his wife who ran off." Preston's expression remained neutral, but Bea felt him tense beside her. "Thank you, Jimmy. Tell your ma I'll handle it." As the boy ran off, Preston turned to Bea. "Quinn's changed his story, it seems. Go back to Rose's and stay there until I come for you." "But please, Bea," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Let me deal with this. I promised you wouldn't have to hide again, and I meant it. But right now, I need you safe while I confront him." The intensity in his eyes silenced her objections. She nodded, and he squeezed her hand briefly before striding toward the hotel, his posture radiating authority and determination. Bea hurried back to the boarding house, her mind racing. Quinn was claiming she was his wife. The audacity of the lie infuriated her. What other falsehoods would he spread to justify his pursuit? Rose took one look at her face when she entered and immediately understood something was wrong. "Quinn," she asked, leading Bea to the kitchen. Bea nodded, explaining what they'd learned. Rose's expression darkened as she listened. "The nerve," she exclaimed when Bea finished. "Well, he's picked the wrong town to spread such lies. Preston will sort him out." "I'm not so sure," Bea said, twisting her hands in her lap. "Quinn is dangerous and he's clever. What if people believe him? What if they think I'm the one lying?" Rose placed a reassuring hand over Bea's fidgeting ones. "Silver Creek folks know Preston Fitzgerald doesn't vouch for just anyone. His judgment means something here." She smiled gently. "Besides, anyone with eyes can see the way my brother looks at you. He'd never look at another man's wife that way." Heat rushed to Bea's cheeks. "I don't know what you mean. We barely know each other." Rose's knowing smile only deepened. "Sometimes it doesn't take long to recognize something worth fighting for." Before Bea could formulate a response, the front door opened and closed. Heavy footsteps approached the kitchen, and Preston appeared in the doorway, his expression grim but satisfied. "Quinn's leaving on the afternoon stage," he announced, with some encouragement. "What happened?" Bea asked, rising from her chair. "I confronted him about his claims. When I mentioned I'd sent telegrams inquiring about his character in the last 3 towns you'd passed through, he got nervous." Preston removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Then I informed him that impersonating a lawman, which he apparently did to get information from the station master in Riverton, is a federal offense. That's when he decided Silver Creek wasn't worth his time after all." Relief flooded through Bea, so powerful she had to grip the back of the chair for support. "He's really leaving." "Just like that. Just like that," Preston confirmed. "He's the type who preys on isolated victims, not someone willing to face real consequences." Once he realized the whole town was watching him, and that I was building a case against him, he folded. "But what if he comes back?" The fear that had been her constant companion for months couldn't be dismissed so easily. Preston moved closer, his eyes holding hers steadily. "Then we'll deal with him again. Together. This is your home now, Bea. No one's going to run you out of it. Your home." The words resonated within her like a church bell, clear and profound. Home. She hadn't had one since her father died, hadn't allowed herself to think beyond survival. "I'll see you safely established as our schoolteacher," Preston continued, "and introduce you to everyone in town. No stranger will be able to come here making claims about you without everyone knowing the truth." "And what is the truth, Sheriff?" Bea asked softly. "You've known me less than a day." His expression softened. "The truth is you're a brave woman who's been running too long from a coward. The truth is you belong somewhere that values you, not for what you can give or pay, but for who you are." He hesitated, then added, "The truth is I knew the moment I found you behind Mabel's saloon that you were someone worth protecting." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within Bea, a place that had been guarded and fearful for too long. For the first time since her father's death, she felt the glimmer of something like hope. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to find words adequate for the gratitude she felt. Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Now, if you're up for it, there's a school board meeting in an hour. They're eager to meet their new teacher." Bea straightened her shoulders, smoothing down the borrowed calico dress. "Then I shouldn't keep them waiting." As they walked through town once more, this time with Rose accompanying them, Bea found herself noticing details she'd been too frightened to appreciate earlier. The cheerful gingham curtains in the general store windows, children playing hoops in the side street, the blacksmith's rhythmic hammering creating a steady heartbeat for the town. Silver Creek was coming alive around her, no longer just a hiding place but a community, perhaps even a home. And beside her walked the man who had made it possible, his presence solid and reassuring as the ground beneath her feet. 1 week, she had promised herself. But as Preston held the door of the town hall open for her, his smile warm with promise and possibility, Bea suspected she might be staying much longer than that. The school board meeting went better than Bea could have hoped. The 5 members, 3 men and 2 women, seemed more concerned with when she could start than with her qualifications. By the end of the hour, she was officially appointed as Silver Creek's new teacher, with classes to begin the following Monday. "That gives you 4 days to prepare," Martha Jensen, the dressmaker's wife, told her as they filed out of the meeting. "Come by the shop tomorrow. I have some fabric that would be perfect for a teaching dress, more practical than that Eastern fashion." "Thank you," Bea replied, touched by the offer. "I'd appreciate that." "We're all just relieved to have someone take the position," Thomas Warren's wife Harriet added. "The children are driving everyone to distraction with their idle time." As promises of help and welcome poured in from all sides, Bea felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, a sense of belonging, of purpose. These people didn't care about her Boston connections or her father's mistakes. They simply needed someone to teach their children, and they were grateful she had agreed. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" Preston murmured as they walked back toward the schoolhouse, where Rose's sons were already delivering Bea's few belongings and the supplies Rose had gathered for her. "A bit," Bea admitted. "Everyone is so helpful," Preston chuckled. "Frontier life demands cooperation. People look out for each other because sometimes that's the difference between survival and disaster." "It's different from Boston," she said. "There, appearances matter more than actual assistance." "And here?" Preston asked, watching her with curious eyes. Bea considered the question seriously. "Here, it seems people care more about who you are than who your parents were or what clothes you wear." "Generally speaking," he agreed. "Though we're not without our prejudices and shortcomings. Every community has them." They reached the schoolhouse as the sun was beginning to set, painting the simple white building with gold and rose. The door to the teacher's cottage stood open, lantern lights spilling out invitingly. "Rose has been busy," Preston observed as they entered to find the small space transformed. Curtains hung at the windows, a braided rug covered the sitting room floor, and the kitchen shelves held basic supplies. The bed had been made up with fresh linens, and wildflowers brightened the bedroom windowsill. "It's perfect," Bea whispered, overwhelmed by the kindness. Rose appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's still missing many comforts, but it's a start. I've left stew warming on the stove and bread in the cupboard." She embraced Bea warmly. "Welcome home, dear." After Rose departed, promising to return in the morning to help Bea prepare for her teaching duties, an awkward silence fell between Bea and Preston. "I should go," he said finally, placing his hat on his head. "You must be tired after everything that's happened." "Wait," Bea said impulsively. Would you stay for supper? I owe you a debt I can never repay, but I can at least offer you a meal." His smile was warm, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You owe me nothing, Bea, but I'd be honored to share your first meal in your new home." They ate Rose's hearty stew at the small kitchen table, the conversation flowing easily between them. Preston told her about growing up in Silver Creek, about his father who had been sheriff before him, about his dreams of seeing the town grow and prosper. "What about you?" he asked as they finished their meal. "What did Beatrice Grayson dream of before life took an unexpected turn?" Bea looked down at her empty bowl, considering. "I'm not sure I ever allowed myself to dream much. Father had specific ideas about my future: a suitable marriage, a respectable Boston life." She met Preston's gaze. Teaching in a frontier town wasn't part of the plan. "And now?" "Now," she said slowly, "I think perhaps I needed to lose everything to discover what I truly wanted." She gestured to the small cottage around them. This isn't what I would have chosen 6 months ago, but now it feels like an opportunity rather than a consolation." Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes life's detours lead us exactly where we need to be, even if it's not where we thought we were headed. Later, as Preston prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "I'll check on you in the morning. The stage leaves at noon. I want to make sure Quinn is on it." "You think he'll cause more trouble before then?" Bea asked, anxiety flickering through her at the reminder of her pursuer. Preston shook his head. "Not likely, but I'll sleep better knowing he's gone for good." He hesitated, then added, "Would you like me to have one of the deputies keep watch tonight?" Bea considered the offer, touched by his concern. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel the constant dread that had been her companion since Quinn first appeared at her Boston door. "No," she said with growing confidence. "I think I'll be fine." Preston studied her face, then nodded. "You're stronger than you realize, Beatrice Grayson." He tipped his hat and stepped into the gathering darkness. "Good night." "Good night, Sheriff," she replied, watching him walk away until his tall figure disappeared into the shadows. As she closed the door and secured it for the night, Bea felt a strange mixture of emotions: lingering fear, yes, but also hope, anticipation, and something else. Something warm that flared whenever she thought of Preston Fitzgerald and the promise in his steady gaze. For the first time since her father's death, Bea slept without dreams of pursuit or capture. Instead, she dreamed of a classroom filled with eager faces, of a garden bursting with vegetables and flowers, of a life built with her own two hands in this dusty frontier town that had opened its arms to her. And if, in those dreams, a certain green-eyed sheriff featured prominently, well, that was her secret to keep. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the summer sun already warming the earth as Bea made her first cup of coffee in her new home. She had just finished dressing in the blue calico when a knock sounded at her door. Preston stood on her small porch, hat in hand. "Good morning. I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," Bea replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest at the sight of him. "Would you like some coffee, please?" As she poured him a cup, she noticed he was dressed more formally than the day before, his badge polished to a gleam. "You're making quite a statement this morning," she observed, handing him the steaming cup. Preston's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Thought it might be useful for Quinn to be reminded of exactly who he's dealing with. I'll be escorting him to the stage myself." "You really think he'll leave without causing more trouble?" "Men like Quinn understand power, if nothing else," Preston replied. "He knows he's outmatched here." They sipped their coffee in companionable silence for a moment before Preston spoke again. "I've asked Rose to come help you get settled with the school preparations. Several of the town ladies mentioned bringing by textbooks and supplies their own children have outgrown." "Everyone has been so kind," Bea marveled. "I'm not used to such community." Preston's expression softened. "That's Silver Creek. We look after our own." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to call on you properly once Quinn is gone and you're settled, if that would be welcome." Heat rushed to Bea's cheeks at his direct approach. In Boston, courtship was conducted through elaborate rituals and family connections. Here was Preston, simply stating his interest without pretense. Yes," she managed, her heart racing. "That would be welcome." His smile was like sunrise breaking across the prairie. "Good, that's good." Another knock interrupted the charged moment. Rose entered with a basket of supplies, her knowing gaze shifting between them. "Am I interrupting?" she asked innocently. "I was just leaving," Preston said, setting down his coffee cup. "Need to make sure our unwelcome visitor makes his departure as scheduled." He put his hat on and nodded to Bea. "Until later, Miss Grayson." After he left, Rose raised an eyebrow at Bea's flushed face. My brother seems quite taken with our new schoolteacher. Bea busied herself with the coffee pot. He's been very kind. Preston is always kind, Rose agreed. But he doesn't look at everyone the way he looks at you. She unpacked her basket, revealing chalk, primers, and other teaching supplies. Now, let's get you ready to face 22 eager students on Monday. The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Bea and Rose cleaned the schoolhouse thoroughly, arranged desks, and organized the meager supply of books. Several town women dropped by with additional materials, a set of McGuffey readers from Mrs. Jensen, slates and chalk from the general store, a beautiful hand-drawn map of the United States from Harriet Warren. By midday, the schoolhouse was transformed from an abandoned building to a place of learning. Bea stood at the teacher's desk, running her fingers over the smooth wood, trying to imagine herself instructing from this position. "You'll do wonderfully," Rose assured her, reading her thoughts. "The children will adore you." "I hope so," Bea replied. "I've never been responsible for shaping young minds before." "You'll learn together," Rose said. "That's how all good teachers begin." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the schoolhouse window, they could see a crowd gathering near the stagecoach stop. Preston's tall figure was visible, standing beside a shorter, thicker man whom Bea recognized with a jolt of fear. Quinn. "The stage is right on time," Rose observed, watching as the coach pulled in, dust billowing around the horses. "And Preston has quite the audience for this departure." Indeed, it seemed half the town had found reason to be near the stage stop at this precise moment. Men lounged casually against buildings. Women chatted in groups while keeping watchful eyes on the proceedings, and several deputies stood at strategic locations. "He's making sure Quinn understands the message," Bea murmured. "This isn't just Preston escorting him out of town, it's all of Silver Creek." They watched as Preston exchanged words with Quinn, his posture rigid with authority. Quinn glanced around at the assembled townsfolk, his expression darkening. When the stagecoach door opened, Preston gestured toward it with unmistakable command. For a moment, Quinn hesitated and Bea held her breath. Then, with a last venomous look at Preston, Quinn climbed into the coach. The driver secured the door, mounted his seat, and with a crack of the whip, the stage pulled away in a cloud of dust. Only when the stagecoach had disappeared from view did the tension leave Bea's shoulders. "He's gone," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "And good riddance," Rose said firmly. "Now you can truly begin your new life here without looking over your shoulder." The crowd outside began to disperse, but Preston remained, speaking with his deputies. After a few moments, he turned toward the schoolhouse, his gaze finding the window where Bea stood. Even across the distance, the connection between them was palpable. He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, and Bea raised her hand in return, a silent exchange of promise and gratitude. Rose cleared her throat gently. "I believe my brother will be calling on you this evening. Shall we finish setting up your home so you'll be prepared to receive him properly?" Bea turned from the window, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that very much." True to Rose's prediction, Preston arrived at Bea's cottage just after sundown, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt under his vest. He carried a small bundle wrapped in paper. "Good evening," he greeted her when she opened the door. "I thought you might like to know that Quinn is well on his way to Cheyenne by now." Relief washed through Bea. "Thank you for seeing him off." "My pleasure," Preston replied, his smile warm. "May I come in?" The small sitting room seemed even smaller with Preston's tall frame occupying it. He handed her the paper-wrapped bundle somewhat awkwardly. "I brought you something. For your first day of teaching." Curious, Bee unwrapped the paper to reveal a small brass bell, its surface polished to a warm glow. "It was my mother's," Preston explained. "She taught at the schoolhouse before she married my father. I thought you might like to have it." Bee ran her fingers over the smooth brass, deeply touched by the personal nature of the gift. "Preston, I can't accept something so precious to your family." "I want you to have it," he insisted gently. "Mother would have approved. She always said a proper school needed a proper bell to call children to learning." "Then I'll treasure it," Bee said softly, meeting his gaze. "Thank you." They sat in the small sitting room, the summer evening breeze carrying the scent of prairie wildflowers through the open window. Preston told her about the town's history, about the families whose children would soon be her students, about the challenges and joys of life in Silver Creek. "It's not an easy life," he admitted. "Winters are harsh and summers can be brutally hot. We face drought, occasionally floods, and the usual frontier troubles. But there's something about this place." He looked out the window toward the darkening prairie. "Something that gets into your blood." "I think I understand," Bee said. "Even in just these few days, I've felt it, the openness, the possibility." Preston turned back to her, his expression serious. "I want to be honest with you, Bee. I'm not a wealthy man. Being sheriff of Silver Creek doesn't bring riches, just a modest living. And this town, it's growing, but it's never going to be Boston." "I'm not looking for Boston," she replied quietly, "or for wealth." "What are you looking for?" he asked, his voice low and intense. Bee considered the question carefully. "Safety at first. That's why I ran for so long." She met his gaze steadily. "But now I think I'm looking for a place to belong, for purpose, for happiness." "And do you think you might find those things here? In Silver Creek?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning that went far beyond the simple words. Bee knew he wasn't just asking about the town, he was asking about himself, about the possibility of them. "I think I already have," she answered softly. The next days passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Bee arranged and rearranged the schoolroom, planned lessons, and met many of her future students as they came by with their parents to introduce themselves. Preston called on her each evening, their conversations growing deeper and more personal with each visit. He told her about losing his father to a gunfight when he was 16, about taking on the responsibility of sheriff at 23 when the previous one was killed by outlaws, about his dreams for Silver Creek's future. In turn, Bee shared stories of her Boston upbringing, of her mother's death from influenza when Bee was 12, of her father's gradual decline into gambling and drink after losing his shipping business to poor investments. "He wasn't always that way," she told Preston as they sat on her small porch watching the sunset. "Before Mother died, he was kind, responsible. After, it was as if he couldn't bear the weight of going on without her." "Grief can change a person," Preston said gently. "But that doesn't excuse leaving his debts for you to handle." "No," Bee agreed. "It doesn't. But I understand better now than I did when I first ran. He was flawed, but he loved me in his way." Preston's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "You have an uncommon capacity for forgiveness, Beatrice Grayson." The touch of his hand sent a current of awareness through her that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with the growing attraction between them. In the week since she'd arrived in Silver Creek, something had blossomed between them that defied conventional courtship timelines, a connection forged in crisis, but deepening in calm. Monday morning arrived with a perfect late summer day. Bee stood on the schoolhouse steps, Preston's mother's bell in hand, her heart racing with nervous excitement. Children began arriving, some eager, some reluctant, all curious about their new teacher. At precisely 8 o'clock, Bee rang the bell. its clear tone carrying across the schoolyard. 22 students of varying ages filed into the classroom, taking their seats with minimal commotion. "Good morning," Bea said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I'm Miss Grayson, and I'm very pleased to be your new teacher." 22 pairs of eyes watched her with expressions ranging from skepticism to excitement. A small girl in the front row raised her hand. "Yes," Bea acknowledged her. "Sheriff Fitzgerald says you're from Boston and you know lots of things we don't," the child stated. "Is that true?" Bea smiled, touched that Preston had spoken about her to the children. "I am from Boston, yes, and I know some things you might not, but I'm certain you all know things I don't. That's why school is wonderful, we all learn from each other." The answer seemed to satisfy the girl, and a boy in the middle row raised his hand next. "Are you going to marry Sheriff Fitzgerald?" Heat rushed to Bea's cheeks as several children giggled. "That's not an appropriate question for school, young man." "Now, let's begin by learning everyone's names, shall we?" The day progressed better than Bea could have hoped. The children were generally well-behaved, if curious and occasionally rowdy. By dismissal time, she had learned all their names, assessed their various levels of education, and begun to form a teaching plan for the diverse group. As the last child departed, Bea sat at her desk, both exhausted and exhilarated. She had done it her first day as a teacher. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the satisfaction of seeing young minds engage with new ideas. A knock at the open doorway made her look up. Preston stood there, his expression a mixture of pride and something deeper, more personal. "Congratulations, Miss Grayson," he said, stepping into the schoolroom. "You've officially survived your first day of teaching." Bea smiled, rising from her desk. "It was wonderful, Preston. Challenging, certainly, but wonderful. The children couldn't stop talking about you when I saw them after dismissal," he told her, moving closer. "Jimmy Mathers said you're the prettiest teacher they've ever had, and Sarah Jenkins was impressed that you knew the capital of every state." Bea laughed. "I'm not sure which compliment I should value more." "Both seem accurate to me," Preston replied, his voice softening. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "You belong here, Bea. I knew it from the first moment I saw you, even hiding behind Mabel's saloon." The sincerity in his eyes made her breath catch. "How could you possibly have known that?" "I was terrified, disheveled, ready to run at the slightest provocation." "Because even then, you had courage," he said simply. "It takes courage to run when necessary. It takes even more to stop running and make a stand." His words touched something deep within her, a recognition of her own strength that she'd only begun to acknowledge. "Thank you for showing me I could." Preston's fingers tightened around hers. "I've never been one to rush into things, Bea. As sheriff, I've learned to be cautious, deliberate, but with you—" He paused, searching for words. "With you, I find myself thinking of a future I never dared imagine before." Bea's heart pounded against her ribs. "What kind of future?" "One where I don't return to an empty house each night," he said softly. "One where there might be children of our own someday, not just the town's children you teach." The directness of his words both thrilled and frightened her. "Preston, we've known each other barely a week." "I know," he acknowledged. "And if you need time, I'll give it to you. But out here, life moves differently than in Boston. We recognize what matters and hold on to it because tomorrow isn't guaranteed to anyone." He stepped closer, his free hand gently touching her cheek. "I'm not asking for promises, Bea, just possibility." In his eyes, Bea saw everything she'd been searching for without knowing its safety, yes, but also passion, partnership, a future built together rather than prescribed by others' expectations. "Possibility," she repeated softly. "Yes, I think I can offer that." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Slowly, Giving her every opportunity to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. His hand cradled her face as if she were something infinitely precious, and Bea found herself responding with a depth of feeling that surprised her. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I found you behind the saloon." Bea laughed softly. "Even when I was covered in dust and terrified, especially then," he murmured. "You looked like a woman who needed someone to fight for her. I wanted to be that someone." "And now," she asked, his eyes met hers serious and intent, "now you're fighting your own battles. And I want to stand beside you while you do." In that moment, Bea understood what Preston had meant about recognizing what matters. In Boston, courtship was a careful dance of social connections and appropriate intervals. Here, life's uncertainty made such conventions seem hollow. What mattered was this connection, this man who saw her strength even when she doubted it herself. "I'd like that," she whispered, and sealed the promise with another kiss. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly like the life Bea was meant to live. Mornings were spent in the schoolhouse with her students, afternoons preparing lessons or helping with community projects. Evenings often in Preston's company as their courtship progressed with the whole town's approving attention. September gave way to October, bringing cooler temperatures and the golden hues of autumn to the prairie. The town prepared for harvest celebrations, and Bea found herself at the center of planning the school's contribution, a historical pageant depicting the founding of Silver Creek. "You've transformed that schoolhouse," Martha Jensen told her as they worked on costumes for the pageant. "I haven't seen the children so excited about learning in years." "They're wonderful students," Bea replied, stitching a pioneer bonnet, "eager to learn, full of questions." "And you're a natural teacher," Martha observed. "Though I imagine we won't be keeping you in that position too much longer, given how things are progressing with our sheriff." Bea blushed, but didn't deny the implication. Her relationship with Preston had deepened steadily, their evenings together filled with conversations about shared dreams and gentle discoveries of each other's hearts. He hadn't formally proposed yet, but the direction of their relationship was clear to both of them and apparently to the entire town as well. "Nothing has been decided," Bea said diplomatically. Martha's knowing smile spoke volumes. "Of course not. But when it is, I hope you'll let me help with your wedding dress. It's not every day Silver Creek's most eligible bachelor finally meets his match." Later that evening, as Bea and Preston walked along the edge of town after supper at Rose's, she mentioned Martha's comment. "Apparently, our future is being planned for us by the town's ladies," she said with amusement. Preston chuckled, taking her hand in his. "Are you surprised?" In a town this size, the sheriff courting the schoolteacher is the most exciting news since the railroad announced they might build a spur line through here next year. "And how do you feel about having our relationship be the subject of such speculation?" Bea asked, genuinely curious. Preston stopped walking, turning to face her in the autumn moonlight. "I don't mind them speculating," he said softly, "as long as what they're speculating about is true." "And what would that be?" Bea asked, her heart quickening at the intensity of his gaze. "That I'm in love with you," he said simply. "That I want to build a life with you, that I can't imagine Silver Creek or any future without you in it." Though they had been moving steadily toward this moment for weeks, hearing the words spoken aloud made Bea's breath catch. "Preston." "You don't have to say anything now," he assured her, his hand warm around hers. "I know it hasn't been long by Eastern standards, but I'm certain, Bea. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Bea looked up at this man who had changed her world so completely in such a short time. She thought of the frightened woman who had hidden behind a saloon, desperate and alone. In just weeks, Preston had helped transform her into someone who stood before a classroom with confidence, who walked through town greeted by name and with genuine warmth, who no longer looked over her shoulder in fear. "I love you too," she said, the words rising from a place of absolute certainty. "And I can't imagine my future without you either." Joy transformed his face. He pulled her close, his kiss deeper and more passionate than their previous, more tentative embraces. Bea responded with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck as the cool autumn air swirled fallen leaves around their feet. When they finally parted, both breathless, Preston reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this for 2 weeks," he admitted, waiting for the right moment. He opened the pouch and tipped a ring into his palm, a modest gold band set with a small, perfect sapphire. "It was my grandmother's. My father gave it to my mother when he asked her to be his wife." He took her hand, his expression solemn yet radiant with happiness. "Beatrice Grayson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Bea's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Preston, I will." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit that seemed to symbolize how naturally she had found her place here in Silver Creek and in Preston's heart. They walked back toward town hand in hand, the future stretching before them like the vast prairie full of challenge and promise in equal measure, but no longer something to fear. News of their engagement spread through Silver Creek, with the speed only possible in a small community where good news was treasured and celebrated. By the following morning, Bea could hardly walk to the schoolhouse without receiving congratulations from everyone she passed. "Told you so," Rose said when she visited that afternoon, hugging Bea tightly. "I've never seen my brother so happy, not in all his years." "He makes me happy too," Bea replied, still somewhat dazed by how completely her life had transformed in the span of a few short weeks. "I never expected to find this when I stepped off that stagecoach. Life has a way of giving us what we need, even when it's not what we thought we wanted," Rose said wisely. "Now, let's talk about the wedding. November would be perfect after harvest, but before the heavy snows." In the days that followed, wedding preparations began in earnest. Martha Jensen started work on a wedding dress of ivory silk, ordered specially from Denver. The townswomen planned the celebration that would follow the ceremony, while the men teased Preston good-naturedly about finally being caught. Through it all, Bea continued teaching, finding joy in her students' progress and in the knowledge that she was truly building a life in Silver Creek, not just passing through, but putting down roots that would hold her steady through whatever storms might come. One crisp November morning, 3 weeks before their wedding date, Bea was writing arithmetic problems on the blackboard when a commotion outside caught her attention. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving fast. She looked out the schoolhouse window to see several riders dismounting at the sheriff's office across the street. One man stumbled as he dismounted, supported by his companions. Even from a distance, Bea could see blood staining his shirt. A deputy emerged from the sheriff's office, took one look at the injured man, and ran toward Dr. Miller's office down the street. Preston appeared moments later, his expression grim as he helped the wounded man inside. Bea turned back to her class, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "Continue with your arithmetic, children. I'll check your work when you've finished." Throughout the morning, more riders arrived in town. Tension hummed in the air, visible in the hurried conversations of adults outside and the worried glances exchanged by the older students who sensed something was wrong. At noon dismissal, Bea instructed the children to go straight home. "No lingering in town today," she told them firmly. "Your parents will want you home promptly." As the last child departed, Bee locked the schoolhouse and hurried toward Preston's office, worry knotting her stomach. Something was clearly happening, something serious enough to bring injured men to town and cause such obvious concern. The sheriff's office was crowded when she arrived. Preston stood at his desk, surrounded by grim-faced men, a map of the territory spread before them. He looked up when she entered, his expression softening briefly before the gravity of the situation reasserted itself. "B," he acknowledged her. "I was going to come find you after we finished here." "What's happened?" she asked, moving to his side. One of the men, a rancher named Peterson, whose son attended B's school, spoke up. "Rustlers hit 3 ranches last night. Stole nearly 100 head of cattle between us, killed 2 of my hands when they tried to stop them." "They're not just rustlers," another man added. "They're organized, well-armed. This wasn't some opportunistic theft." Preston nodded grimly. "We believe it's the Blackwater gang. They've been moving north from Texas, hitting communities along the way. They take what they want, kill anyone who resists, then move on before the law can organize a response." Fear clutched at B's heart. "And they're here now, in our territory." Based on the direction they were headed, they're camped somewhere in the hills north of town, Preston confirmed. "We're organizing a posse to go after them, recover the stolen cattle, and bring them to justice." The implication struck B like a physical blow. Preston would be riding out to confront dangerous, violent men who had already killed without hesitation. "When do you leave?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Within the hour," Preston replied. "The sooner we move, the better chance we have of catching them before they can move the cattle across the territorial line." The men returned to their planning, discussing routes and tactics. B stood silently at Preston's side, fear and pride warring within her. This was who he was, Silver Creek's protector, a man who put duty above personal safety. It was part of why she loved him, even as it now filled her with dread. When the meeting concluded and the men dispersed to prepare, Preston drew B outside, away from curious ears. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "This isn't how I wanted to spend the weeks before our wedding." B forced a brave smile. "You're doing your job, the job you love, the job this town needs you to do." He touched her face gently. "We'll be careful. These men are dangerous, but there are 20 of us riding out, all experienced with firearms. We have numbers on our side. Just come back to me," B whispered, leaning into his touch. "That's all I ask." Preston's kiss was tender yet urgent, a promise and a farewell. "I will. We have a future to build, remember." An hour later, B stood with the other women of Silver Creek, watching as the posse rode out of town. Preston led them, tall and steady in the saddle, his sheriff's badge catching the afternoon sun. He turned once, his eyes finding B in the crowd, and touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that carried all the words they'd left unspoken. Then they were gone, hoofbeats fading into the distance, leaving the women and children and older men to wait and worry and pray. Rose appeared at B's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "He'll come back," she said with quiet certainty. "Preston has always come back." B nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. She watched until the riders disappeared over the horizon, then turned back to the schoolhouse. She would keep teaching, keep the children's routine as normal as possible, and hold fast to the belief that the man she loved would return to fulfill the promise of their future together. The days that followed were the longest of B's life. She taught her classes with determined cheerfulness, refusing to let her worry show to the children. Evenings were spent with Rose and the other women whose husbands and sons had ridden out with the posse, finding strength in shared concern and mutual support. On the third day, just as dusk was falling, the sound of approaching riders electrified the town. Bee was at Rose's house, helping prepare supper when they heard the commotion. "They're back," someone shouted from the street. Bee and Rose rushed outside, joining the crowd gathering in the town center. The posse rode in slowly tired men on tired horses. Some sported bandages, and all bore the grime of hard riding and hard fighting. Behind them came recovered cattle, driven by several of the ranchers' hands. Bee scanned the returning men anxiously, her heart seizing when she didn't immediately spot Preston's familiar figure. Then the crowd parted, and she saw him riding at the rear, his arm supporting an injured young deputy. Relief made her knees weak. He was alive, apparently unharmed. As he helped the injured man dismount and transfer to Dr. Miller's care, Preston looked up and saw Bee standing with Rose. The exhaustion in his face gave way to a smile that warmed her from the inside out. She waited while he gave instructions to his deputies, assigned men to guard the recovered cattle, and ensured the wounded were being cared for. Only when his immediate responsibilities were addressed did he make his way to her, his stride betraying his fatigue. Without a word, Bee stepped into his embrace, inhaling the dusty, sweaty scent of him, feeling his solid warmth against her. He was real, he was whole, he was home. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. Preston's arms tightened around her. "I promised I would." Later, after he had bathed and eaten, Preston told Bee and Rose what had happened. The posse had tracked the rustlers to their camp in the hills, finding them preparing to move the stolen cattle across the territorial line. "We surrounded them at dawn," Preston explained, his voice rough with exhaustion, "offered them the chance to surrender peacefully." His expression hardened. They chose differently. The ensuing gunfight had been fierce but brief. 3 of the Blackwater gang had been killed, 2 wounded and captured, the rest scattered into the hills. "We lost one man, Carl Jenkins, youngest boy, barely 20, Preston said, grief evident in his voice. 3 others wounded, but Dr. Miller thinks they'll recover." "And the stolen cattle?" Rose asked. "Recovered, most of them. We're returning them to their rightful owners tomorrow." Bee listened silently, understanding more fully the reality of Preston's job, the responsibility he carried for the lives of his men, the weight of decisions that resulted in death or life. "You should rest," she said when he finished his account. "You've hardly slept in days." Preston nodded, the adrenaline of the past days clearly fading into bone-deep weariness. Rose insisted he stay in the spare room rather than walk to his own house, and for once, he didn't argue. As Bee prepared to return to her cottage, Preston caught her hand. "Stay with me a while," he asked softly, "just until I fall asleep." She sat beside him on the bed as he lay down, still fully dressed except for his boots. His hand held hers, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I thought of you," he murmured, his eyes already closing. "During the fight, I thought of you waiting, and it made me more careful than I might have been." Bee's heart constricted with love for this man who had changed her world so completely. "Then I'm glad I was waiting," she whispered, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "Rest now. I'll be here when you wake." Preston slept for 14 hours straight, his body claiming the rest it desperately needed. When he finally awoke, late the following afternoon, some of the shadows had receded from his eyes. Life in Silver Creek gradually returned to normal in the days that followed. The wounded healed, the dead were buried with honor, and the cattle returned to their proper pastures. The 2 captured members of the Blackwater gang were transported to the territorial capital for trial, facing certain conviction for murder and rustling. As November progressed, and the wedding day drew nearer, Bee found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this place and this moment in her life. From terrified fugitive to respected teacher, From solitary survivor to beloved fiancé, the transformation seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Yet each day confirmed the rightness of her choice to stay in Silver Creek, to build a life with Preston, to embrace this community as her own. When Martha Jensen presented her with the completed wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk with delicate lace that somehow managed to be both elegant and appropriate for a frontier wedding, Bea felt a certainty that transcended any lingering doubts. The evening before their wedding, Preston came to call at her cottage. They sat on the small porch, wrapped in blankets against the November chill, watching stars appear in the vast prairie sky. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Preston asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. Bea considered the question honestly. "Not about marrying you," she replied. "That feels like the most natural decision I've ever made. But there's a part of me that still can't quite believe how much has changed since that day you found me hiding behind the saloon." Preston's laugh was soft in the darkness. "I couldn't believe my eyes when I first saw you, this beautiful, clearly out-of-place Eastern lady, pressed against Mabel's wall like she was trying to disappear into it." "I was," Bea admitted. "Disappear, I mean. I'd spent so long running, hiding, trying not to be noticed." "And now?" Preston asked, turning to look at her in the starlight. His face held all the love and promise that had become the center of her world. "Now I never want to hide again," Bea said simply. "You gave me that, Preston. You and Silver Creek." His kiss was gentle, reverent, a pledge of all that tomorrow would bring. "Get some rest," he murmured against her lips. "Tomorrow's a big day." "The first day of our life together," she agreed, happiness bubbling through her like champagne. Their wedding day dawned clear and cold, the prairie landscape transformed by an overnight dusting of snow that glittered in the morning sun. Bea woke to the sounds of activity in the town's Silver Creek, preparing to celebrate its sheriff's marriage to its school teacher. Rose arrived early to help her prepare, bringing Martha Jensen and several other women who had become Bea's friends in her months in town. They filled the small cottage with chatter and laughter as they helped Bea dress, arranged her hair, and shared advice both practical and humorous about married life. "You look beautiful," Rose said as Bea stood in her wedding dress, the ivory silk catching the light. "Preston won't know what hit him." "I hardly recognize myself," Bea admitted, looking in the small mirror. The woman who gazed back at her bore little resemblance to the frightened fugitive who had arrived in Silver Creek months ago. This woman stood tall, her eyes clear and confident, her smile genuine. The church bells began to ring, signaling it was time. Bea took a deep breath, gathering her bouquet of winter greenery and dried prairie flowers that Martha had arranged. "Ready?" Rose asked, adjusting Bea's veil one last time. Bea nodded. "More ready than I've ever been for anything in my life." The town had turned out in full force for the wedding. The small church was packed with familiar faces, the parents of Bea's students, the shopkeepers who had welcomed her, the ranchers whose wives had brought food and fellowship during the anxious days of the posse's absence. And at the altar stood Preston, tall and handsome in his best suit, his eyes finding hers the moment she appeared in the doorway. The love in his gaze was so tangible it seemed to reach across the church and enfold her in warmth, despite the November chill. Bea walked alone toward him, needing no one to give her away. She had given herself her heart, her future freely and with full awareness of what she was choosing. Each step brought her closer to the man who had found her at her lowest moment and shown her how strong she truly was. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, Preston whispered words meant only for her. "No more hiding." "No more hiding," she agreed, her heart full to overflowing. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion and promise. They spoke their vows clearly, their voices carrying to the back of the packed church promises to love, honor, cherish, protect, in good times and difficult ones, for all the days of their lives. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston's kiss held all the passion and tenderness of a man who had found his match, his partner, his future. The church erupted in cheers and applause as they turned to face their community as Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. The town hall had been transformed with evergreen boughs and ribbons, tables laden with food prepared by seemingly every woman in Silver Creek. There was dancing to fiddle music, toasts offered by friends old and new, laughter and joy that warmed the cold November night. As evening deepened, Preston led Bea away from the celebration toward the house that would now be their home, his house, expanded and renovated with the help of townsmen while the posse was pursuing the rustlers. Rose and the other women had furnished and decorated it in Bea's absence that day, transforming the bachelor sheriff's quarters into a true home for the newlyweds. "Welcome home, Mrs. Fitzgerald," Preston said as he carried her across the threshold, his voice husky with emotion. Bea looked around at the simple, welcoming space that would be the foundation of their life together. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Later, in the privacy of their bedroom as they discovered each other fully for the first time, Bea marveled at how completely her life had transformed. From terror to security, from loneliness to love, from hiding to standing proudly in the light, all because a kind-hearted sheriff had found her behind a saloon and promised she would never need to hide again. As Preston held her in the aftermath of their lovemaking, his heart beat steady beneath her cheek. Bea knew with bone-deep certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in a person, in a community, in a life built on love and trust rather than fear. "What are you thinking?" Preston murmured, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. Bea smiled in the darkness. "I'm thinking that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you really need." His arms tightened around her. "And have you found what you need, Bea Fitzgerald?" The sound of her new name sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she whispered. "I've found exactly what I need right here in Silver Creek." Spring came early to Silver Creek in 1876, the harsh winter giving way to green grass and wildflowers by late March. Bea stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse, watching her students file out for the day, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. 5 months of marriage had brought a contentment Bea had never imagined possible in her previous life. She and Preston had settled into a rhythm that complemented both their independent natures and their deep connection, she teaching the town's children by day, he maintaining law and order, coming together in the evenings to share the day's events and build their life together. The town had grown over the winter, new families arriving as word spread of Silver Creek's prosperity and stability. Bea's classroom now held 28 students, and the town council was discussing the need for a second teacher to handle the increasing numbers. As the last child disappeared down the path toward town, Bea gathered her books and papers, preparing to head home. Preston had mentioned a surprise at breakfast, his green eyes twinkling with secretive pleasure, and curiosity had been simmering within her all day. The walk home took her past the general store, where Henry Daniels called out a greeting. "Afternoon, Mrs. Fitzgerald. That husband of yours was in earlier, buying all sorts of interesting supplies." "Was he indeed?" Bea replied with a smile. "Any hints as to what he's planning?" Henry shook his head, chuckling. "Sworn to secrecy, I'm afraid, but I will say it's about time." Intrigued, Bea continued home, wondering what Preston could be planning that the town apparently already knew about. Their small house came into view, smoke rising from the chimney despite the mild day. Preston's horse was tethered outside, confirming he had returned early from his usual rounds. "Preston," she called as she entered, setting her books on the table by the door. "Out back," his voice replied, carrying from behind the house. Bea made her way through the house and out the back door, stopping in surprise at the sight that greeted her. Preston stood beside a partially constructed structure, the beginnings of what appeared to be a small greenhouse attached to the back of their home. "What's all this?" she asked, moving closer to inspect the wooden frame and the stacked glass panels waiting to be installed. Preston's smile was proud and slightly nervous. "You mentioned missing your mother's conservatory in Boston, how you loved tending plants even during winter." He gestured to the structure. "It won't be as grand, of course, but I thought you might like a place to grow things year-round." Emotion welled in Bea's throat. She had indeed mentioned her mother's conservatory, but only once in passing, months ago. The fact that Preston had planned this surprise based on a single conversation, touched her deeply. "Preston, it's wonderful," she said, moving into his open arms. "When did you have time to do all this?" "I've been working on it in bits and pieces," he admitted. "Henry ordered the glass specially from Denver. The men have been helping when they can." He kissed the top of her head. "Do you really like it?" "I love it," Bea assured him, "and I love you for thinking of it." They stood together, contemplating the half-finished greenhouse in the golden afternoon light. It was one more way Silver Creek was becoming truly home, not just a place of refuge, but a place of growth, of putting down roots that would sustain them through all seasons. "There's something else," Preston said after a moment, a new note in his voice that made Bea look up at him questioningly. "Another surprise," he shook his head, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty that reminded her of their early days together. "Not exactly, more of a question." He took a deep breath. "How would you feel about expanding our family?" Joy surged through Bea so intensely it nearly took her breath away. "Are you asking if I want children?" Preston nodded, watching her face carefully. "I know we haven't discussed timing specifically, but seeing you with your students, the way you nurture them, I can't help thinking what a wonderful mother you would be." Bea reached up to touch his face, her heart overflowing. "I would love nothing more than to have a family with you, Preston Fitzgerald." The brilliance of his smile matched the happiness in her own heart. "Really? You're ready to try?" "More than ready," she assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "In fact, I've been thinking about it for some time." His arms tightened around her waist. "Then I suggest we continue this conversation inside, Mrs. Fitzgerald." Later, as they lay tangled together in their bed, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor, Preston traced gentle patterns on Bea's bare shoulder. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted softly. "For years, being sheriff was enough. The town, the people, the responsibility, it filled my life. I never felt anything was missing until, Bea prompted when he hesitated. "Until I found a beautiful, terrified woman hiding behind Mabel's saloon," he finished. "Then suddenly, I could see all the empty spaces in my life that I hadn't even noticed before." Bea laid her hand over his heart, feeling its steady, reassuring beat beneath her palm. "I was so scared that day, not just of Quinn, but of everything. I'd been running for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand still, to belong somewhere. And now," she smiled against his chest, "now I can't imagine being anywhere but here with you. Silver Creek is more home to me than Boston ever was." They drifted into comfortable silence, the kind that comes only with complete trust and acceptance. Outside, birds called to one another in the lengthening evening light. From town came the distant sounds of life, a wagon creaking, children's voices, the bell of the general store as customers came and went. "I wonder what our children will be like," Preston mused, his hand moving to rest protectively over Bee's abdomen. "If we have a daughter, I hope she has your courage. And if we have a son, I hope he has your integrity," Bee replied. "Though I'll be perfectly content with either as long as they're healthy." Preston propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart flip over in her chest. "Have I told you today how much I love you, Beatrice Fitzgerald? You might have mentioned it," she teased, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw. "But I don't mind hearing it again. I love you," he said solemnly, "more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "And I love you," she replied, pulling him down for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. "My protector, my partner, my home." As summer turned to autumn, then winter, and finally to spring again, Silver Creek continued to grow and prosper. The railroad spur line was completed in February 1877, bringing increased commerce and new residents. Bee's classroom expanded to require that second teacher, a young woman from St. Louis who quickly became a friend. And in April, just as the prairie was bursting into bloom once more, Bee and Preston welcomed their first child, a daughter with her father's green eyes and her mother's determined spirit. They named her Hope, for what she represented to both of them. The beautiful future that had seemed so impossible when they first met behind a dusty saloon in a frontier town. As Bee rocked her newborn daughter in the greenhouse Preston had built for her, now lush with plants and flowers even as the spring winds blew outside, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. She had hidden once, terrified and alone. Preston had found her, offering not just protection but the promise of a life where she would never need to hide again. That promise, made by a man who understood the value of standing tall even in the face of danger, had transformed her from a woman running from her past into one embracing her future with open arms. Outside, Silver Creek hummed with the activity of a thriving community. Inside, in the warmth of the home she and Preston had built together, Bee Fitzgerald held her daughter close and gave silent thanks for second chances, unexpected journeys, and love that found her even when she was trying her hardest not to be found. She would never hide again. Instead, she would stand proudly in the light, beside the man who had shown her she was strong enough to face whatever came their way, surrounded by the community that had become her true home. And when Hope was old enough to understand, Bee would tell her the story of how her parents met of a frightened woman behind a saloon, a kind-hearted sheriff, and the promise that changed everything.